Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here's some of the stories we're watching tonight. We're keeping an eye on what is becoming a flooding catastrophe in Iowa.
If the town has to shut down, it's going to be because we could not hold the water back.
And in Mississippi, a police shootout leaves one inmate dead, but 3 others are still on the run.
We're still on the lookout for these individuals, and I'm very optimistic that we will be able to locate them.
And Disney says it's suing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for what they are calling the weaponization of government power. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, how young is too young to be on social media? Some lawmakers on both sides of the aisle say that 13 years old should be the minimum, and they want mandatory parental consent for teens.
Parents want and deserve tools to help keep their kids safe online.
And we are keeping an eye on some severe weather tonight from California to the Midwest. We're going to get to all of it, but let's start in the Midwest, where scientists are calling the historic flooding of the Mississippi River a slow-moving disaster. Now, this is all happening because of melting snow in North Dakota and northern Minnesota near the headwaters of the Mississippi. The river is expected to peak in some parts as early as tomorrow, while in other places, like parts of Iowa, the crest might not happen until early next week. Now, the river has started flooding across several parts of the Midwest, from St. Paul, Minnesota to Davenport, Iowa, with some experts saying that this year's rise could be the worst in 20 years. Cities are preparing for the flooding. The city of Dubuque in Iowa has closed all 17 of its floodgates. It's only the 3rd time it's done so since 1973. Homes, businesses, and basic infrastructure are also starting to see the water creep in. Those are aerials that you're seeing right now from the city of Davenport. You can see just how far the river has swelled around that baseball field, spilling into the parking lot right next to it. And community members are also stepping up to help businesses in their towns. Here's the high school football team in Davenport putting up sandbag barriers to protect local small businesses. Meanwhile, some residents are already switching up their modes of transportation, all while expressing frustration about the entire situation. NBC correspondent Maggie Vespa joins us now from Davenport, Iowa. Maggie, every time we check in with you, it just looks worse and worse.
I know. I mean, Gadi, I'm basically standing in the river right now, right? I mean, there's no point in delineating the difference. Sure, I'm on a road that typically is dry. It's also typically next to, or it is next to a park that runs usually alongside the river, but it's all submerged. And I can tell you really in the last 24 hours, by our sort of anecdotal estimation, this water has moved up at least a city block in 24 hours. And sure, this is a kind of low-lying area that's river adjacent, but what's really hitting people now is it's moving up this much, it's moving up this quickly, and the water here in Davenport isn't supposed to crest until Monday. Today's Wednesday, so we have 5 days of this, forecasters say, and people are really starting to realize that even though they're used to floods in this area, this one could be really dangerous. It could be really historic. Gadi.
And Maggie, yesterday we were talking about the gas being shut off in a lot of places. Now that that's happened, what's going on there? Has something like this happened before? And what's the reaction from the community?
I mean, the short answer to that question is no. People along the river tell us that nothing like this has ever happened before. The gas company telling us that they've done this in certain emergency measures in small doses. And right now they've done it to about basically 100 people whose homes are already flooded. But it kind of begs the question, is that going to be a widespread tactic used for everybody's homes who are remotely impacted by the water? People in the area told us that they're really floored by this, even given what they're seeing being next to the river. Take a listen to one man's take who we spoke to earlier.
When I first moved out here, we had very small floods. We called them nuisance floods because that's about what they were. They came and went real fast. You know, you get kind of upset when they're going to take something away from you because they don't even explain why. I mean, they never had water in their gas lines before.
Another woman we talked to, she said, I've lived along the river for 12 years. I have never had my gas cut off before. And she added, you know, people are telling us that basically we can't stay in our homes. It's getting cold enough overnight that you need to heat your home. If you don't have gas, she said, where are you going to go? And more importantly, she added, who, for a lot of these people, especially who might be elderly, retired, on a limited income, she said, who's going to pay for this kind of now forced evacuation. But Gadi, the gas company tells us they had no choice. They say this is a dangerous situation that, again, is only beginning. Gadi.
Maggie, it seems like every interview you've done, you can see a boat or a canoe in the background. Is that how a lot of people are getting around there?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people in that neighborhood in Pleasant Valley specifically evacuating by boat and by canoe. We've also seen people just kind of, a lot of people are obviously really curious and freaked out by this, and they want to see it for themselves. So a lot of people have been coming up to the waterfront, wading into it themselves a little bit. They're outfitted remotely like we are. People we've seen kind of trying to drive their cars through what they think is low-lying areas, but officials are pleading with people like we see in flood situations. They're saying, please don't do that. You can't see often how deep the water is. You can't see what's under it. So they're really asking people to take this seriously, again, knowing that this will go on in a lot of these cities along the Mississippi for days. Gadi, I'll send it back to you.
We still haven't seen the worst of it yet. Maggie, thanks so much. Meanwhile, here in California, it is already shaping up to be one of those bizarre years where people are going to be skiing in the middle of the summer. This year, parts of the Sierras got about 319% more snow than normal. Mammoth Mountain said they hit about 58 feet. That is like 10 stories of snow total, which could keep the snow on the mountain through July. And check this out. These satellite images from this year to last year show such a massive difference. But as the temperatures here are warming up, that snow is starting to melt fast, and with that comes a lot of fear of flooding. Yosemite Valley is shutting down Friday because of flood concerns, and NBC News' Steve Patterson joins us now. Steve, I don't know if you've been watching Maggie's reporting out along the Mississippi, but I keep wondering if that's what California is going to start looking like, too.
Yeah, Gadi, Maggie's reporting is incredible. You can see it rise on her a few inches every hour by hour. Look, I mean, not only do climatologists say it's unequivocally going to look like that, parts of California certainly, without question, but parts of California already do. I'm thinking about the Tulare Basin right now. This area of California in the middle of the state, a huge agricultural producer that was once a lake. It was one of the biggest lakes the west of the Mississippi that was recently diverted over time for agriculture, for homes, and now it's back to being a lake, 60,000 acres underwater as we speak, and growing. By July, climatologists say it could be as much as 200 miles of that part of the state completely underwater. Already 600 homes affected, 37 destroyed, and it's getting worse and worse day by day. And Gadi, that is not the only part of the state that could see this massive snowmelt affect so much here.
And Steve, what are the areas of most concern right now?
Well, Tulare, first of all, has to be one area of focus. The governor was there just yesterday talking about how desperate the flood situation is. But that's not all. Northern California, I just recently went to Stockton, where one of the big concerns is the levees. There is so much infrastructure in this state that is not prepared for this amount of water that's hanging above us in the Sierra Mountains as we speak. Some of that is porous. A lot of it is disinvested. A lot of it hasn't had any attention in years, and specifically because we've had so much of this drought recently, a lot of the funding that would have went to strengthening those walls has gone away. And so there's real concern in a place like that, that if you have a flood event, especially in Stockton, where one federal study said if you get a big flood, you could see 10 to 12 feet of that town completely underwater. You're talking about a humanitarian crisis on the level of something like a Hurricane Katrina. California is the most leveed state in the entire country. There are miles and miles and miles of levees, and a lot of them are in bad shape because of the reality that the state has had to face now for decades. And so it's expected to get a whole lot worse with the amount of snow, again, up there. No place is really prepared for that much if it comes down in the way that scientists fear it could, which would mean a massive heat wave and all of that water rushing down all at once. They hope it doesn't play out like that, but already we're starting to see warnings as early as this weekend, Gadi.
Let's hope not. Steve, thanks so much. Yeah. And we are still keeping an eye on severe weather all across the country tonight, especially in the south. You can see millions of people right now are at risk of dangerous storms in Texas and Florida, and that means that they could see possible tornadoes. We're already seeing some hail come down. This was the scene in Texas, and we've also been seeing a lot of cities along the Mississippi River at risk of intense flooding as the height of the river keeps rising. NBC's Bill Karen joins us now. Bill, let's start with those severe storms in the southern plains in Florida. What are you expecting there?
We've already seen incredible hail. I mean, I just saw a picture of grapefruit-sized hail with permission from the person. Yeah, it's just incredible. And then the hail in Florida has been epic too. You know, going through the screens over their pools and then splashing in the water. So that's all the stuff that you'll be seeing tomorrow, and if you haven't already seen it on social media. So the areas of concern now. So here's Dallas. There's Austin. Dallas, you're safe. Fort Worth area had some thunderstorms earlier, no problems. All of the action has been to the south. About an hour and a half ago, Waco, Texas was under a tornado warning. They had a very strong thunderstorm right over the top of the city. It could have dropped a tornado at any point. They were fortunate. They were all in their shelters. Their tornado sirens were going off. It's what we call a rotating wall cloud that was just off the ground, but no tornado, no damage. That was great. But that thunderstorm was the one that produced that grapefruit-sized hail, and there still is an active tornado warning with that one. We actually just had a new tornado watch that was issued for Lufkin all the way to central Louisiana. This is going to go well after midnight. So these nighttime tornadoes, obviously people head to bed, they get less warning, but it's going to be a nervous evening for a lot of people in this region. Here's a closer view of some of those stronger storms. Here's Waco. There's that tornado-warned storm right here. This shows the little circulation with that. And then we have another severe thunderstorm warning that's going to come for the Waco area. So you may get a second round. They did report ping-pong ball-sized hail in Waco. You probably have a chance for another hailstorm heading your way shortly. In Florida, this storm, which started up here by the Space Coast, is the one that produced the epic-sized hail in the Melbourne area and southwards heading down towards here to Indian River County. Now there's new severe thunderstorms in between Orlando and Tampa, not far from the Disney complex there in Kissimmee. Those also could have some large hail. So here's the map that we showed you earlier. The areas of greatest concern tonight heading into Louisiana, and then this severe thunderstorm threat in Florida should diminish over the next couple hours. The areas of Texas to Louisiana, that'll probably continue after midnight. A little more energy in this area. And going into this event, this hatched area was the best chance of any strong tornadoes. And it's just interesting that Waco was right in the middle of that. And that's why we were very scared that they could get a strong tornado, but they did not. As far as severe weather goes tomorrow, Lafayette to New Orleans to Mobile, that's the greatest area of concern, a little bit there in southern portions of Texas. And as far as the Mississippi River goes, of course, we've been, showed you all the reports this evening earlier about how high the water is. This is, Gadi, it takes so long for the water to go down the Mississippi. This crest in Dubuque won't be till Saturday. Davenport's not till Monday of next week. Burlington, Iowa, not till Monday of next week. It's a slow-moving disaster on the Mississippi.
Bill Cairns, and so we're looking at next week, and then is there anything beyond that in the forecast?
Well, they make these forecasts based on two things. One is based on the snowmelt, which is primarily what has caused all the problems with this. And the second piece of that is how much it rains. Obviously, it's springtime. Eventually, it's going to rain, over this basin that's collecting. Thankfully, this huge storm we're dealing with now is to the south of this area, so that's not going to make it worse. But when we talk about a forecast that's already almost 5-6 days away, eventually we're going to get a heavy rain event on top of this, and that could make things worse downstream. So we'll have to watch St. Louis next, heading down to Memphis. That's going to be as we go through middle to end of next week.
Bill, thanks so much. And turning now to Mississippi for a wild story about a manhunt there. These 4 men escaped from a Mississippi jail over the weekend, and police were searching for them. One of them, Dylan Arrington, right there, killed a pastor in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, officials think the pastor pulled over to help Arrington after a motorcycle wreck and say Arrington shot him several times, then took off in the pastor's truck. You can see that red truck there in some pretty blurry security footage zoom by. Officials say he barricaded himself into a home this morning where there was a shootout with police before the house caught on fire. One body was found inside the house, which authorities are still working to identify. Meanwhile, police are also searching for the 3 other inmates. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander joins me now. Blaine, bring us up to speed here. One of the 3 is still on the loose, and we're hearing now might have also escaped to Texas. Is this a multi-state search now, and are they considered armed and dangerous?
Absolutely, they are, Gadi. This is spanning a number of states. In fact, where that inmate was found, was seen on surveillance video, is about 450 miles away from where he first escaped. So we're talking about a very wide range of area that officials are searching right now. I just spoke with the sheriff of Hinds County. He tells me this is still very much an active search. He says that there are federal and local law enforcement agencies all engaged in this. But yeah, that's, there are 3 inmates still believed to be on the loose somewhere. One of them seen not too far away from Houston. That's also where the county maintenance vehicle was found wrecked and abandoned on Sunday as well. So they do believe they at least have some sort of area for one of the inmates. The other 2, though, the sheriff just tells me they really don't have a pinpoint on where they could possibly be. So you've got officials here in Mississippi searching, officials in Texas searching, and then the U.S. Marshal's Office that's really kind of trying to keep an eagle-eye view out for all of them. Now, what's really unbelievable about this, Gadi, is the way that they escaped. The sheriff tells me that there was a hole in one of the cells. Somehow all 4 of those inmates made their way into that cell, climbed into the hole, and that's what allowed them to get access to the roof of the facility. They stayed on the roof for some unknown amount of time, and then they were able to kind of spread out and get out of the roof from there. So yes, unbelievable the way that they were able to escape, and still very much an active search right now, Gadi.
Blaine, do you know how much time elapsed before they were able to escape and before the jail noticed that they were missing?
Around 8:30 at night or so is when we understand. So this kind of happened in several phases. So they were discovered missing. They did kind of like a check. And so they checked around the facilities, then realized, yes, some people are missing, put them on lockdown to try and figure out who was missing. That's when they isolated it and figured out that they were the 4 inmates. There's some video maybe about an hour or so after they're believed to have escaped where you see a white vehicle, that white maintenance truck, breaking through a fence and leaving the property there as well. So all of this is kind of a moving timeline and a moving target, but certainly happened in several stages, Gadi.
Wow. And the pastor that was killed, what do we know about how that panned out? The pastor stopped to help and then was gunned down?
This is just an unspeakable tragedy, Gadi. Anthony Watts is his name. He was a pastor at a church not too far away from here. He'd been in this area his whole life, had been at that church for about 6 years. And yes, by all accounts, that's exactly what happened. One of those inmates, Arrington, police say, stole a motorcycle, ran off the road. The pastor saw that. He was just driving by in his truck. You saw in that grainy surveillance video, he stopped, put the truck in reverse, backed up, and then stopped to try to help this man. Police say that just seconds later, the guy shot him multiple times, stole his truck, left him to die on the side of the road. We've been in touch with his family today. His daughter put out a very touching statement saying, she's a daddy's girl through and through, that he was her everything, that, he taught her so much about life and about becoming the woman she is today, and that her family's just broken over this. I also spoke with an associate pastor of the church, somebody who had known Pastor Watts for much of his life, since high school. Here's what he told me about his friend. Take a look.
If the man would have asked or told him to give me your truck, he would have gave it to him.
He would have done it.
Yes. Yes. But he was going to talk to him first. Try to save him.
That's exactly what he said. He would try to save him. So he really said that that's the type of man he wants him to be remembered for. Again, yes, certainly a multi-state manhunt going. And here in Mississippi, a family that is deeply mourning tonight, Gadi.
Such a senseless situation there. Blaine Alexander, thanks so much. And still ahead this hour, breaking from tradition, a historic move from the Pope that has women all over the world cheering. Plus, 200 million Americans are exposed to forever chemicals in their tap water. Let that sink in. But researchers are now saying that they might have a solution, and all of that is just ahead. So stay tuned. Tonight, our look around the world in 80 seconds starts in Mexico, where authorities are working to ID 8 bodies that were dumped in Cancun. Now, the remains were discovered by a police search over the weekend. 3 of the bodies were identified as previously missing. The others are still unknown. The U.S. State Department advises increased caution when traveling to Cancun and the surrounding area. And in a historic shift, Pope Francis has decided to give women the right to vote at an upcoming meeting of bishops. Now, the new rules will grant 5 religious sisters voting rights, and all of of this comes after years of women's groups asking for the right to vote at high-profile conferences in the church. And a major diplomatic phone call today between the Chinese and Ukrainian presidents. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky said in a tweet that he hopes the long and meaningful conversation will, quote, give a powerful impetus to the development of our bilateral relations. After the call, China announced its former ambassador to Russia will head to Ukraine to try to negotiate what China's president calls a political settlement of the war. And there is a new agreement between the United States and South Korea. For the first time, the U.S. ally will have a central role in planning for the use of nuclear weapons in any conflict with North Korea. CNBC senior White House correspondent Kayla Tausche has more.
Gadi, that agreement is the centerpiece of a state visit by South Korea's President Yoon that's being capped off with a state dinner at the White House. The visit commemorating 70 years since the end of the Korean War and the beginning of what President Biden called an inflection point on the world stage. With tensions simmering in the Indo-Pacific, the two allies say they remain focused on deterrence.
We've met several times over the last year, and each time we have deepened our nation's partnership, and for the benefit, I think, of both our peoples. Today's no exception. Our mutual defense treaty is ironclad, and that includes our commitment to extended deterrence, and that includes the nuclear threat and the nuclear deterrent.
The crux of that cooperation is the Washington Declaration, a new agreement to coordinate South Korean and U.S. resources to respond to a nuclear threat. That means more joint exercises, shared intelligence, and contingency planning. U.S. military assets like aircraft carriers and a nuclear-armed submarine will have a regular presence to protect the peninsula against provocations from North Korea and China. But a senior administration official cautions there is no vision of returning U.S. tactical or any kind of nuclear weapon to the Korean peninsula as there was in the Cold War. Of course, clouding this visit is the recent leak of classified intelligence documents that allegedly showed hesitance on the behalf of the South Koreans to provide military aid to Ukraine. When asked directly about those leaks, President Yoon said the two countries continue to communicate and deferred to the U.S. investigation. Gadi?
Kayla Tausche, thanks so much. Now over to Israel, where the country marks its 75th anniversary, while tensions continue to rise at the border and inside of that country. NBC's Josh Letterman reports.
The new government, headed by David Ben-Gurion, is installed in Tel Aviv.
The birth of Israel in 1948. For Jews, a jubilant return to a homeland. For Palestinians, the Nakba, the catastrophe, a homeland destroyed. 75 years later, Israel is at a crossroads, more divided than ever, this time about the country's democratic future. The current government's sharp shift to the right and consolidation of power raising painful questions about what Israel will look like at 100.
We are fighting for our democracy. We don't call it illiberal democracy. We call it de facto dictatorship.
For much of Israel's history, the question of democracy centered on whether the growing Palestinian population would become the majority, ruled by a Jewish minority. But along the way, things shifted. Now it's the ultra-Orthodox population growing faster than any other. Census data shows the average ultra-Orthodox woman in Israel has 6.6 children. Secular women, just 2.
The ultra-Orthodox population is growing at such a fast pace that its share in the population is doubling every generation, every 25 years.
Some economists say that's unsustainable because many ultra-Orthodox don't work or serve in the military, pursuing a life of religious study instead, leaving a shrinking share of the population shoring up Israel's economy and security.
First of all, they are our brother. They are Jews. But of course, we should find a way to send them into the labor force.
Chaim Goldberg is a photographer whose work centers on his own community, the Orthodox. He says Orthodox people do a lot for Israel that secular people often won't, like first aid, charity, and recovering bodies after terror attacks. He doubts Israel really wants all the Orthodox to serve in the army. One more fault line in a society showing cracks.
This barrier was built more than 2 decades ago to wall off the occupied West Bank. But it has become a reminder that while many people share this land, the divisions here are deeply entrenched.
It's one of the most hard things to be living without an identity.
Ahed Iman is a Palestinian born in Jerusalem, but who makes his art in the West Bank. He says the current far-right government actually makes him hopeful that it will force the world to see Israel for what it is.
I think this is the beginning of the end of Israel, if this government will stay in charge.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing
for the Palestinians? It's a good thing for the Palestinians, definitely.
Back in Jerusalem, Chaim has discovered something new of late coming into focus in his lens. He says, until now, if I'd pass a torn flag, I'd think nothing of it, just throw it away. But today, it has a different meaning, about how Israel's society is completely torn apart. Josh Letterman, NBC News.
Josh, thanks for that. Coming up, there could soon be an age limit for using social media. We're going to explain that. But first, you got to see this. An 84-year-old man is lucky to be alive after flames. His minivan was torched last night in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The man was driving with a flat tire when sparks started to fly. You see that there. The van bursts into flames, leaving a fiery trail as the man kept driving. Eventually, he was pulled over. That's when officers that you see ran towards that fire, pulled him out. Luckily, they saved his life. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. All along big stretches of the Mississippi River, people are preparing for even more catastrophic flooding, while millions of other Americans in the southern plains in Florida could see severe weather starting tonight. And police in Mississippi are searching for an escaped inmate. Actually, 4 escaped inmates. Investigators say one of the 4 men who escaped killed a pastor who tried to help him while on the run and may have died in a shootout with police. And President Biden met with his South Korean counterpart while at the White House today, the two releasing a plan to counter nuclear threats from North Korea. Let's go now to Capitol Hill, where lawmakers are once again talking about cracking down on social media, this time proposing a bill that would ban anyone under the age of 13 from using apps like TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Now, this is a bold move, but the senators behind it say it is necessary.
I have sat across from a father who showed me the last picture of his beautiful daughter who died by suicide the next day. Y'all, enough is enough.
Now, if passed, the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act would also require parental consent and restrict platforms from using algorithms on anyone under 18 years old. Joining us now for more on this is NBC's Ali Vitale. Ali, let's break down specifically what lawmakers are proposing and why. I know that there are a lot of people in the United States of America that would argue that it is parents that should be the one who is making the determination on whether these kids should be on platforms. What's the argument behind cracking down via legislation here?
Look, these lawmakers would also argue in bipartisan fashion, I would add, that parents should have a say in this if their child is between 13 and 17 years of age. That's why there's a carve out in this bill that if they are between that age range, with parental permission, they can get onto these social media apps. But if you're 13 or younger, that's where these lawmakers are placing the cutoff. They're basing that on studies that we've seen about the impact of social media on younger kids. And then, of course, the Surgeon General's own warning that says 13 is too young to be on social media platforms. And so this is a bill that would govern not just the age in which you can get onto those platforms, but if a parent can consent to it, and also just the algorithms that these companies use to actually serve up that content once these kids are on it.
I keep thinking about enforcement. I mean, a lot of these platforms already have the age restriction where you can't be under 13, but kids just get on, they fake a birthday, and then the next thing you know, they're on the platform. If we start to see a nationwide age restriction, like, how do you even enforce that?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question, and one that lawmakers are clearly thinking through here as they put the onus on the companies to create a sort of pilot program for age verification that would then have a government tie-in that would at least allow the government to have some oversight here. And then, of course, you'd go by case of state attorney generals and others from an enforcement mechanism standpoint. That's really kind of far off in the distance at this point, but it's clear that lawmakers are thinking about the ways that they can implement it, because you're right. Many of these platforms already have have rules about what kids can and can't do before the age of 13. But you'll remember the head of TikTok came here and testified on the Hill not too long ago, and lawmakers were not convinced by the answers that he gave them about the ways in which certain rules about the algorithm were supposed to work, but may not actually be working to protect kids.
And Ellie, we saw the similar ban just go through in Utah last month. On the national level, how likely is this to pass?
Yeah, that's the excellent question, too, because we know that Congress is quick to talk, but not so quick to act. Though in this case, I think that there's sort of a story of just who's behind this bill. The fact that it's bipartisan is notable, but I think who the bipartisan actors are even more so, because you have the most progressive of progressives in Senator Brian Schatz on the Democratic side, and one of the more conservative hardliners in Tom Cotton on the Republican side. Of course, Senator Chris Murphy and Senator Katie Britt, the other Democrat and Republican respectively, co-sponsoring this bill. But when you look at the range here on the political spectrum, that's one of the reasons that these co-sponsors are bullish. The open question is, even if it gets through the Senate, what happens when it gets to the Republican-controlled House? But right now, we're just in the introductory phase.
Yeah, such a wide spectrum there, finding something to agree on. Allie, thanks so much. And when it comes to the latest culture wars, in one corner we have Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, in the other Mickey Mouse and the Magic Kingdom. Yeah, Walt Disney, the company, is suing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And in federal court documents, the company claims DeSantis waged, quote, a relentless campaign to weaponize government power against Disney in retaliation for expressing a political viewpoint. Now, this is a political battle that's been brewing over since last year. It started when Disney took a stance against DeSantis' so-called Don't Say Gay law. And joining us now is NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, what exactly is Disney alleging here, and what's the proof?
Oh, hey there, Gadi. Well, first, I should mention I am in Jerusalem right now because Governor Ron DeSantis is here on an overseas trade trip. Beautiful backdrop behind me is this Dome of the Rock here in the Old City. But this trip is being overshadowed at the moment, at least back home, by, as you mentioned, this lawsuit, this remarkable lawsuit, really, from Florida's largest single-site employer, Disney, a company known around the world. And as you said, Disney is alleging that Governor DeSantis' actions were part of a targeted campaign of government retaliation that was orchestrated by Governor DeSantis. And Disney is alleging that part of this is because the company opposed the so-called Don't Say Gay bill last year, and that it really had no friction between Disney and Governor DeSantis until that happened. So they're really turning this into a free speech issue. The company saying that it is being punished just for speaking its mind. Remarkable when you consider just how many people are employed by Disney in the state of Florida. The sitting governor now being sued by this massive company, Gadi.
And Gabe, kind of odd to be talking to you while you're there in Jerusalem because DeSantis is there on a trip. But I got to ask, is he in Israel because this is some sort of lead up to like an announcement for 2024? What's he doing in Israel right now?
Well, that's the thing. This is widely seen, this trip is widely seen as perhaps bolstering Governor DeSantis' foreign policy credentials as he readies a presidential run. So the timing of this is all still up in the air. Several sources have told NBC News that an announcement could come as early as next month. Now, Gadi, that is when the Florida legislature is supposed to end its session in early May. An announcement could come at any point after that. But during this trip even, Governor DeSantis has been coy. He says that he's not a candidate yet. He's wanted to focus on the job creation that he says his administration has been focused on. And that's what makes this, in some ways, ironic, in that this is an overseas trade mission where he's touting the number of jobs that have come to Florida from Japan, from South Korea, now Israel, and he will even go to the UK later this week. This is an overseas trade mission where he's touting this job creation, and yet he is locked in this ongoing feud with the largest single-site employer in Florida. It is quite surreal to be standing here in the Old City. He is set to deliver a high-profile address tomorrow at a Jewish conference here celebrating the 75th anniversary of independence here, and then he's expected to meet as well with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Gadi?
Overseas trade mission, and yet he's getting questions about Disney, and he's getting questions about running in 2024. Gabe Gutierrez, thanks so much. Up next in the future of everything, we are talking clean drinking water. And if you're like, well, this doesn't apply to me, I already have clean tap water. That's what I thought, too. We'll explain more when we come back. And here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. In New York, the civil rape case against Donald Trump resumed today, with writer E. Jean Carroll herself taking the stand. Carroll telling jurors today, "I am here because Trump raped me." Trump denies those claims, calling them a lie and a hoax. Amazon began laying off employees in cloud computing and human resources. Now, the number of people laid off at this latest round could be as high as 9,000 workers. That's on top of the 18,000 job cuts that took place earlier this year. In Washington, Hunter Biden's lawyers met with prosecutors over possible charges against the president's son, and this is all surrounding an ongoing Delaware criminal investigation into Hunter Biden's taxes and a potential felony gun charge. In Arizona, Governor Katie Hobbs is facing heat after vetoing a controversial bill that would have let cooks legally register with the state and sell perishable foods like salsa or tamales. It had bipartisan support, but Hobbs shot it down, citing concerns about foodborne illnesses. And rapper and producer for the 90s group The Fugees was convicted today on 10 felony counts. Pras has been charged with acting as an unregistered foreign agent of China, illegal campaign contributions, and witness tampering. He has pleaded not guilty. And for some scientists, the future of water is chemical-free. And you might be shocked at just how many forever chemicals are in our tap water. But let's start by trying something different. Let's start with the good news first. Engineers at the University of British Columbia have developed a way to treat water that removes what are known as forever chemicals for good. And that would be huge news because regulators have been trying to crack down on those chemicals for years. The EPA talking about requiring utilities to take out toxic chemicals in everything from clothing to dental floss, even toilet paper. And at least 10 states already require some of that. Now, on to the bad news. According to one study, as many as 200 million Americans are exposed to PFAS in their tap water. And here to discuss all of this is Dr. Majid Mohseni. He is a chemical and biological engineering professor at UBC and developing this new technology. Professor, welcome. First off, let's just talk about what makes these chemicals so toxic and why are they so hard to get rid of?
Thank you. Good evening. Yes, these chemicals known as PFAS or forever chemicals, which their chemical names is poly and perfluoroalkyl substances, they have within their structure carbon-chlorine bonds, which are man-made and strongest bonds that we know in chemistry. So they are very hard to break down. They don't naturally degrade under normal conditions. So that's why when they are released in the environment or when they enter our body, they stay and even accumulate in our bodies. So that's what gives them this property that is just causing harm to the environment and also our health.
And then you guys came into the picture and somehow figured out not only how to isolate these chemicals, but also how to destroy them as well, right?
Yes. So there are some technologies or some processes that even environmental protection agencies recommend with respect to removing them from water. The problem with those are twofold. One is that they may not be effective against all types of PFAS. Again, when we are talking about PFAS, we're talking about thousands of different chemicals. We are not talking about one compound or isolated group of compounds. So those available processes that are approved, they can only remove only few of those or certain groups of them. So the rest of them, we are going to be exposed. The second problem is that once those saturated, the media, absorbing media that we even use them in our households, for example, in our pitchers to treat the water, once they're saturated, they are considered as toxic waste because PFAS is accumulated on them. If we put them in a landfill or a garbage, they are going to come back in the environment as well. So with those two in mind, we've been developing some types of filtering materials or absorbing materials, we call them, that not only can capture a wider range of PFAS, a wider range of chemicals, but also we can actually take the PFAS that are captured out and form a concentrated solution, and then we destroy them and, as we call them, defluorinate them. We break those carbon-fluorine bonds and really detoxify those chemicals.
Dr. Mohseni, here's fingers crossed for scaling up soon. Thanks so much for joining us. Scientists recently discovered a liquid spewing out of the seafloor near Oregon, and they didn't know anything about it except that it was warmer than the seawater around it. Well, after more research, they realized these seeps happen near fault zones in the ocean's crust, and these seeps might be able to teach us a lot more about earthquakes and global oceanic trends. Erica Zucco at King 5 has more.
We've never seen an event like this.
A milestone for oceanographers as University of Washington researchers analyzed this seep from the seafloor, first spotted by a student during a 2014 voyage.
It was a phenomenal experience.
Since then, they've monitored the site and just published a study on what's now called Pythiazoasis. Researchers say, based on calculations, they believe fluid is leaking from near the boundaries of plates along the Cascadia subduction zone. Scientists believe it may impact friction in the fault zone, but they don't believe this feature will trigger earthquakes.
Are we going to have a megathrust event, a magnitude 9 right here because of the Pythiazoasis? No. In fact, it's probably the opposite, because instead of the magnitude earthquakes, the earthquakes that we've observed, we have seismometers on our network, are, magnitude 4-ish, a little over 4, something like that. So, it rumbles, but it's not a magnitude 9 that unzips the entire subduction zone.
More research is necessary to understand exactly what's driving the flow of fluid. Scientists are interested in the development of more sea life year to year near the site, and what finds like this mean for the future.
As we start thinking about climate change, how we don't have good measurements of how much methane is actually coming out of here and how much reaches the surface, right? And it's a greenhouse gas. So, there's many, many reasons to study these systems.
Erica Zucco, King 5 News.
Erica Zucco, thanks so much. That does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow, but until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.